So we're doing something a little bit different. So we took one of my classes and we sucked it down to like a fun size candy bar. You know those? And they're like, this isn't as fun as the full-size candy bar. We pulled it down to the little-size candy bar, and that's what this is. So over the next couple months, well, June and July, so several weeks, we're gonna take the story of the Bible, and we're gonna go through it in 3 themes. So last week we talked about the nations, that God's heart for all the nations, and how this is a major theme in the Bible. Tonight we're going to talk about the world and his presence in the world. And then next week we'll talk about redemption and sin. So next week will be really more familiar to most of you. This week you'll think I'm a tree hugger, but I'll explain. Then we're going to go not back, but we're going to go, okay, what does all that mean for where does Jesus fit into all of that? And you're like, oh, of course he fits. I'm going to challenge you that we often, in trying to read the Bible and apply it to ourselves, we actually boot Jesus out of the Bible. And you're like, oh, never, no, we don't do that. I would say that we do. And so come in a couple weeks and I will hurt your feelings and then I'll stitch them back together. But we're going to spend 2 weeks on it. If you just want more material, I don't know where Miss Madeline is back there. She had a whole book from the class she took. Way to go, Madeline. She comes in and takes notes. And so if you want that, it's always online. It's online all year long. It is a handbook that I put together, and then it's videos of me. So if you can stand listening to me, there's a bunch of videos of me just explaining over the handbook, here's more information. So if you want to just cruise through Walmart and listen to me, and you can put me on double speed, you can do that. You don't have to. You're not in the class. No one expects anything of you. We will do the class again probably next year, and it includes homework and a little presentation you make at the end, but it's actually a good benefit. It's the king size candy bar to this. It's the full shebang, and so you'll learn a lot more if you actually take it. So this is just a QR code to that material, and then the thing at the bottom. If you went to our website, you could get to it, but that is always available for you online. And then I made a little video, a 20-minute video for this, of me just going real briefly over the whole Bible timeline in just a real basic form, so that you could know at least what are the facts, what are the events in order. We usually spend 2 weeks on just that in the class, and so it's just a 20-minute, here's what happens with no frills. Okay, so tonight we're talking about the king and his place. So we're going to talk about Jesus and God and the earth, okay? So it's going to be a little bit different. Like I said, you're going to be like, this isn't how I normally would look at the gospel. And that is kind of the point. I want you to feel a little bit like, I don't know how I felt about that. That would be, again, a good outcome. Because what that says is that you're being challenged a little bit. You're going, that's not what I'm used to. That's good. And if you also walk away and go, I don't fully know what to do with that, I'm going to actually give you something really, really simple at the end that you can do to respond to all of what you hear. I'm going to take all this theology and have you do something. You could do something super simple as a response. But it should be a little bit like, I don't know. I'll come back next week when we talk about sin again. I put that one last because it's the most familiar. I wanted the unfamiliar stuff up front. And so if I know for some of you, it's maybe this is weird. It's supposed to be a little weird, okay? But what happens when we come to the Bible, I said this last week, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it forever. When we come to the Bible, if you come and all you look for is what you like and are used to, that's all you'll find, okay? If you come to the Bible and you look for more and you ask bigger, broader questions, you'll actually find a lot more that's there. The other thing is when we come to it, sometimes you all have a relationship with somebody who thinks something's important that you don't quite care about yet, right? So do I, right? They just care so much about football, and you're like, I like the nachos that come with football. That's the part I like. But because you love this person, you have watched football, as have I, right? I'm not really into football. Maybe one day. So because they care about it, you care about it. That's what happens when you read the Bible. You go, oh, I don't know how to care about this, but God, you seem to really care about this. And if you really care about this, this must be important. So I'm at least going to hang out here, and I'm going to at least examine this, because if this is important to God, maybe it should be important to me. I'm just not there yet. And that's an okay place to be. Does that kind of make sense? Great. Okay, so let's go through. Somehow, I really don't know how. I've never had this happen. My thing erased all my notes. I have the PowerPoint, so we're going to be okay. But all I have now is what you see. So we're just gonna, maybe we'll end on time for once, because I have no supplemental material. So we'll do it from memory and see how it goes. So again, we're gonna go through the Bible story. What I did this week, I tried last week that double screen thing. I didn't like it. And so this time I just have the sections that we're in at the bottom. And as we go, it'll just kind of like at the bottom of YouTube, like it'll just be like chapters in where we are, so you can kind of track, oh, I'm here in the Bible storyline, okay? Again, you can go online and get more info on the whole Bible storyline. All right, let's go. So the Bible begins with creation. You guys are so good at this. In the creation, so as I said last week, the first 3 chapters of the Bible are like the whole Bible story kind of encompassed. Really the 3rd chapter. Really, if you went and read Genesis 3, that is like the setup for everything that's going to happen in the rest of the Bible. Genesis 3, that's like the little tiny fun size, right, version of the entire Bible story right there in Genesis 3. We have this good creation, but then we have sin come in, but then we have the punishment for sin, yet in the punishment, God is making a promise that he will make all this right. And we'll talk about that more next week when we talk about sin and redemption. But God creates the world and he says everything is good, right? It's all good. The only thing that wasn't good was that man would be alone. But everything is good, 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 good. He creates the world and the world is very good. And he creates mankind out of what originally? The dirt, right? The dirt. This alone should make you go, now this is where, again, I have only hugged a tree once in my life as a joke. But, so sometimes here's what happens. I'm going to talk a lot about nature today, okay? And some of you are going to be like, this hippie needs to get an SUV. I have an SUV, okay? I want you to understand the connection that we have to the earth. And this is not me, again, this is not me trying to. So here's what we do. We tend to hear something like this, like what some of the things I'm going to say tonight, and we go, well, can't you take that too far and be like an eco-terrorist and blow up a Humvee dealership? Yes, but that's not what we're doing, okay? Because the problem with when you start to hear something a little unfamiliar and you automatically go to, can't you take that too far? Typically, we haven't taken it far enough. So there's something between 0 and 100, right? We go, I don't want to take that to 100. Well, the Bible says that the problem with how we look at nature is that in our sin, right, we see the creation and we worship it rather than the creator. That's the problem. The problem is not that we would find God's earth important, okay? That's what I want to say tonight. So some of us are like, no, Andrew, I shoved a palm tree into the gas tank of my SUV to get here, and I felt good about it, and I ran over 3 bunny rabbits. That's what I thought we should be, like that seemed manly to me. All I'm getting at is I want you to see here 2 things. 3 things. Really, there's 3 themes within the theme. 1, the earth is really important to the Lord. 2, the nation of Israel is important to the Lord. And 3, I forgot. Oh, God's presence. We'll see where God's presence lands as we go through. So I told you I have no notes, so you're at the mercy of you know how I am. Okay. All right. So God creates man out of the earth, and God communes with Adam and Eve where? Right in the garden. He shows up and he walks with them in the garden. In the garden is important. It doesn't say everywhere is garden, this place is garden. We believe, Bible people, I don't know, you can be a Bible people too, but Bible people believe that what's going on here is that God has, right, he made the earth, and then he starts to form it, then he starts to fill it, then Christian people who, they argue over what all that means, and we won't get into those arguments, but they argue over what that means. My point is that then he puts a garden in, and he puts Adam and Eve in to tend it, it says, right? He puts them in to tend it, and he says to them, be fruitful and multiply and do what? Do you know? Fill the earth and subdue it. And so what they're being told to do is basically, I started creation, now you continue the work of creation. I began it, now you continue what I've done. there's a word in Hebrew used for how God creates, which means creates out of nothing. And then there's words for how man creates, which means to be creative. And so as we're creative and as we cultivate, we're doing God's work. We're continuing, they were to continue his work, I believe, by taking this garden that he built for them and extend that out. I believe that outside of them, it was kind of more of a wasteland, which is partly why I think Cain was like, I don't want to go out there. They'll kill me. It's crazy out there. It's like a movie that hasn't been made yet because we don't have movies yet, but it's chaotic out there, right? So the Bible is God making this beautiful place for Adam and Eve and telling them now extend that. It says also that he makes Adam and Eve in his image. They're like him, okay? They're not like a giraffe. God didn't come later as a giraffe because we are, I think, more like God than we realize. Not that we are on the level of God. That's not what I mean. I mean that we can identify with God. I mean, we're going to say this next week, God can represent us on the cross. We represent him to the world, we saw last week. So we are much more like God. We're in an overlapping category with him. We're higher than the rest of the creation. We are not like the rest of the creation. Animals do not sit around and talk about how they are or are not like the rest of creation. We do. We reason. We will. We have a relationship. We have emotion. We suffer differently. We live differently. We understand God differently. Does it mean fully? No, but we understand God because we're made in his image. And so he gives Adam and Eve this original purpose statement to have dominion over creation. This is their job, okay? But quickly, we come to the fall in Genesis 3, very quickly. And when they fall, we'll talk next week, yes, about sin, but something really happens, what interesting happens. First, they put fig leaves on themselves because they feel naked. And we'll talk about that next week. Why do they feel naked? We'll talk about it. But God clothes them with animal skin. So what had to happen to get animal skin? I don't think he went like, now make animal skin. I don't think that's what he did. He actually, I think, killed something. I think he killed something, which is weird. I don't know if he had them kill it. I don't know if he killed it. I've always thought of him killing it, but an animal has to die, right? That's interesting. The first thing that creation that sin harms is actually the creation. Why? Because if it harms them, and we'll talk about this next week too. See, come back next week because everything overlaps and I can't separate them out. God told them that in the day they disobeyed him, what would happen to them? They would die. Did they die that day? No, we'll talk about that because there's, I think, two ways that I could explain that. We'll talk about that. But something died. An animal died, right? So sin immediately affects creation. And we would say that they were supposed to bring order to creation, but this now brings chaos to creation. Now we have animals, we would say that this is where death and destruction and hurricanes and earthquakes and all this stuff begins at this point, that creation itself is cursed. And when Peter's writing his letters, he says that a creation groans for redemption. It waits for redemption. It's also fallen. It's also crooked. It's also off. It's also not doing what it's supposed to do. Just as our nature is bent, so creation is bent. It never quite functions the way that it's supposed to function. Adam is told that part of his curse, right, is that from the sweat of his brow and through thorns and thistles and fruitlessness, he'll toil, and that's how he'll get fruit from the ground. It was going to be just here's some fruit. Go pick some fruit. Now it's through weeds and stuff. How many of you hate weeds? I hate weeds. Horticulturally, botanically, there's really no definition of a weed. It's just an opportunistic plant. Meaning, and it sounds like, what does that mean? That means there's no difference between a weed and not a weed in terms of like the biology of the plant. It's just like, how come this plant can live no matter what, and this plant in my house dies in 20 minutes. Somebody here gave me a plant once, and I was like, I will try to keep this alive for you. And I brought it home one day. I left it outside thinking it would be happier out there. And it lasted one day. And I felt bad, and I've never told her that. And she's not here tonight. Okay, don't give me a plant. I try, but I can't. So this is part of this curse. What's Eve's curse? What's her curse? Remember, she was supposed to be fruitful and multiply, but now it's going to come through what? Pain, difficulty. It says through difficulty you will have children. This word have children in Hebrew could be two things. It could either be actually delivering a child or getting pregnant. How much infertility do we see in the Bible? All through the Old Testament, even the New Testament, a very common theme, right? Because all of a sudden, sin has now affected health. Sin has affected nature. Sin has affected everything around us. That's the world that they live in now. So we move forward and we kind of fast forward. We get to the flood where people have multiplied and multiplied and multiplied, but the wickedness has multiplied with them. And so God kind of presses the reset button and goes back, right? Do you remember if you look back at Genesis chapter 2, it talks about the Spirit of God hovering above the face of the waters, right? There's nothing, there's just water, and the Spirit's hovering above the face of the water. Here, in the flood, what's above the face of the water? The ark. We are almost back to create, like he resets it almost all the way back to creation, almost all the way back to zero. But Noah preserves the plant and animal life on the ark so that he can restart. And when he gets off, it's interesting because he's told that he may eat animals and that animals will fear man. So there's this change in relationship now. I don't know if they'd never eaten an animal before that, which seems kind of weird, but that seems like what it's saying is all of a sudden now the relationship is like further breaking down where now you can eat animals and they're going to fear you now, right? That's an interesting one. The relationship between man and creation has changed further. We get to the Tower of Babel a couple chapters after that, really two chapters, I guess, after that, depending on how you look. And people were supposed to, we learned this last week, they were supposed to be fruitful, multiply, and do what? Fill the earth. But what are they trying to do at Babel? Stay in one place, right? Stay in one place. They were supposed to glorify the Lord, but now they're trying to glorify themselves. Babel, if you like this picture, I think is inaccurate. So the Tower of Babel, they talk about it being built into the heavens. And so a lot of people are like, oh, they were trying to climb into heaven. Not really, I don't think. If you look at the ancient Near Eastern idea, what a temple was for in their thought was that's where you brought the gods down. That's where they would come meet with you, and you got to pick the place, kind of. So you were controlling things, and heaven would come and meet earth. So for them, they're saying heaven's going to meet earth here, and God comes and says, no, you can't stay in one place. I want you to fill the earth, because he knows, I'll get to there in a minute, he knows that ultimately he's going to pick the place, and then after that, he will meet with them all over the earth. And so we get that's Genesis 11, we get then to Genesis 12, we get Abraham. Abraham, we zoom into this one person from the whole world, we zoom into one individual, Abraham, and God makes a promise to Abraham that he's going to give them this great land. Later on, he'll describe that land, and it's huge. It is like what we would call the Middle East. Like it's from like, I think it's, the Euphrates to the Nile. Like it's this huge area that the Israelites never took, the Jews have never taken. He's promised this huge land. And in that is going to come, it's related to this blessing that God says, I'm blessing you, and through you all the earth will be blessed. So he promises this special place, and Abraham and Sarah, they travel through that place. If you ever if you ever notice, like in the Bible, it has all these place names, it's because it doesn't have maps. So it's telling you, it'd be like, in the back of your Bible, you might have a map. They don't have a map. So you're like, why are there all these places described? Because there's no map. So they're explaining it to you in words, right? So it feels like a lot of places, but it's really just drawing you a map. So basically, they go down through this land of Canaan, but they go straight through it into Egypt, and then they go back to it, and they get this little place, and by the end of their lives, they have basically a cave and a field. That's kind of what they have, and it's like your descendants will inherit all the land that your foot has touched, but right now they just have like a cave and a field, and I think a well. So they have this little sample, this little taste of what God's going to give them. And so when we read something like Abraham and Sarah being buried in this cave, we should go, oh, this is a little sample of what God's ultimately going to do. Their children, again, who we call the patriarchs, Isaac and Jacob and their children, go down into Egypt. And it says in Egypt that they're able to multiply, as I said last time, because the Egyptians thought they were icky because they were shepherds. They didn't want to marry with them. They didn't want anything to do with them. And so they gave them this area in Egypt. And when Jacob, who's Joseph's father, if you're like, I don't have any idea who these people are, you might have to take the whole class or read the Bible. I apologize. But just stick with the themes. So Joseph goes down he's sold into slavery. In Egypt, he stores enough grain so that not only his brothers, but all the world, not the whole, not, I don't think like Korea, but like the ancient Near Eastern world that was there came and was fed and made well in Egypt. And we talked that last week about him being a representative of God's people, blessing all the nations. He points to Jesus in that he's in that position. So it says Jacob comes down with him, but when Jacob is old, he says, make sure to bury me back in Israel. And so there's this cool scene at the end of Genesis where they embalm him like an Egyptian, and they give this procession, and the Egyptians are honoring him, and they walk his body all the way back to Israel and bury him back in Israel because that's where he wanted to be buried. So all the Egyptians come with him to bury Jacob back in Israel. It's a really cool scene. And so there's something right about this place because this is the place that God has given them, but God also uses Joseph to have enough food from the earth to feed all the nations. Okay, and then later on, right, as those descendants have multiplied, about 400 years later, we're not really sure, but about that, we think, they've multiplied, and so God is showing his power. We said last week, all those plagues, they're not random. They all relate to an Egyptian god. So God is showing his power over the false gods of the nations. But here we could also say he's showing his power over the earth, right? Frogs and lice and cattle and the Nile. He's showing his power over the earth and the worship of the earth. Because a lot of those things were either a god they worshipped, so they would actually worship the Nile itself, or they would worship something that should have been able to control that. So it was like, this god should be able to control frogs. Oh, shoot, now we have too many frogs. And so this was God showing his power over them, really serving and worshiping in some way the earth. And so Moses leads his people out of bondage back towards their own land. When they're in the wilderness, in between, going back all the way back to, it was Canaan at the time, they're given the law and they build this thing called a tabernacle, which is this tent complex that they would break down and put back together, and they would move with it, right? And this was the place God said, this is now where I'm going to dwell with you. This is now where I'm going to meet with you. And so the tabernacle now becomes that place. And the tabernacle, well, I'll get there in a second. So the Israelites are preparing to live in the promised land. So they're getting all these laws, and it's when you go into the land, this is how it's going to be. The book of Deuteronomy is their take two. When I was in like sixth grade, because we were sixth grade boys, when they would open the room to our classroom, we would just like, and go in, and like people got stabbed, and there was like spit, and like I think we set fire to something, and like we would all just come in like crazy, and our teacher would say, get out, and come back in the right way. And that's what God is doing in Deuteronomy. They were supposed to go into the land. They got too scared. They didn't trust the Lord. So he goes, okay, get out, go back into you're going to go wander around in not your land, in the wilderness. This generation that wouldn't go in will die out. Your children and grandchildren will inherit it. Come back in the right way. That's actually the entire book of Deuteronomy, is this repetition of the law to the next generation in line. And you're like, if you read through, you're like, I just read all these things. It's because for them, it's 40 years later. For you, it's 40 chapters later, right? You got to feel the centuries a little bit in the Bible. And so they're coming back in. When they're coming back in, there's all these laws about the land. And actually, Deuteronomy 28 and 29 end with this idea of, if you go in and obey the Lord, here's what's really weird to us. We do not think this way. This is one of those things where you're like, I do not understand that. It says, if you go in and you obey the Lord, the result will be that the land will flourish. If you go in and you disobey the Lord, the land will be cursed and you'll be removed from it. And you're like, what does that have to do? Like, how does like the apple harvest, what does that have to do? We don't think that way. You and I buy apples in a little convenient like plastic 5-pound bag, right? That's how I function with apples. That's not how they function. I don't think they had apples, but whatever they had. It's just such a different mentality. But here's the point. God is linking obedience to him with the flourishing of the earth. Does that make sense? Okay, is that a little bit like, that's not how I think of my obedience to the Lord. My lemon tree will not produce any lemons in my backyard at all. I must be disobedient. That's not the case. Like, you just live in California and it's hot. That's the problem. But very strongly, Deuteronomy 28:29, go into the land and obey, the land will be blessed. Go in and disobey, the land will be cursed. Okay? And so they build this tabernacle, and the tabernacle points us back to the Garden of Eden. So the tabernacle is always set to face east. This is one of those weird things where you're like, why are there all these details? Like, why are these details in the Old Testament? They mean something. So the tabernacle, when they set it up, it was the doorway always faced east. In Eden, when they got kicked out of Eden, where did they go? Do you remember? You don't have to even think about it too hard. I'm kind of leading you into the answer. They were kicked out to the east. When Cain is kicked out, it's out to the east of Eden. John Steinbeck book, very good book, right? East of Eden, east. And so when the idea of this tabernacle faces east makes it like the Garden of Eden. It has embroidered cherubim, angels, on the entrance to the inner holy place. And so there's cherubim guarding the entrance, just like in the Garden of Eden, angels guarding the entrance. There's the lampstand. It says the lampstand looks like a tree. And so we would say that represents the tree of life that was in the garden. And there's precious stones in it, in the tabernacle, pomegranate, not actual pomegranates, like they made them as parts of the robes of the priests and the embroidery and all. Palm imagery, lilies, and gourds. So what should this should make you think of a garden? Like, you don't have to be a Bible scholar to be like, that sounds gardeny. And it's not just because they liked it. It's not just because it was a nice floral pattern that they found at Joann's, which I think closed. So it's not that. It's that God is saying, this is now the garden where I dwell with you. Now, where are they at this point? They're in the wilderness. They are not in a garden. So God is like, when I go with you, that's where the garden is. When I go with you, that's where this is it. That's where this is. This points also forward to the throne room of the Lord. There's a couple places in Ezekiel and in Daniel and in Isaiah where you get these images of God's throne room. And so in the tabernacle and later the temple, there's this thing called the bronze laver or the sea. And if you look at the temple, the imagery of the throne room, it talks about the sea, like this very mysterious, like contained sea or sea of the floor, or it's this weird, it's cool. There's angels again before the Lord, just like in the throne room images, we get the angels, holy, 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 and they're constantly before the Lord. There's smoke, fire, and clouds in the tabernacle, both through the rituals and when the pillar of cloud and fire guides them. There's incense in the tabernacle and temple, and then the Bible talks about the prayers of the saints rising like incense into heaven. It says that in Revelation. Again, precious stones are shown in both. And the lampstand, there's a 7, if you ever see a menorah, it has 8. In the tabernacle, it's 7, and I would get into why, but you can ask me later. But there's a 7-candled lampstand in the tabernacle, which is linked to the 7 lamps of fire in the book of Revelation. If you're like, I am so lost, it's okay. This is like second-tier stuff. You don't have to remember all this stuff. That's okay. All I'm saying is this. The tabernacle points us back to Eden, where God's presence was with us, and it points us up to heaven, where God's presence ultimately dwells, okay? The tabernacle and the temple are very, very similar in their layout. The temple is the permanent, like made in stone and wood version, right, of the tabernacle, but they are pretty much basically the same in function. What's interesting, and when they build the tabernacle, it has columns, and those columns are built to look like palm trees. And so again, we should go garden, God's presence in the garden that we lost, right? That should come to our mind. As they go into the promised land that they've been promised, that's why it's called the promised land. We have these chapters of the conquest and the judges, which I'm kind of putting together. So they go in, they conquer the land, they divide the land. And Joshua leads the people, again, miraculously across the Jordan River, this time east to west. Don't worry about how I know that. It is. Just trust me on this. It's east to west. He leads them. So if we're coming from the east to the west, what should that tell us? We're going like into Eden, right? Okay. And Ruth. See, I have no notes. So like I'm sorry. You just have to bear with me today. My notes disappeared. So Ruth, which is this image. We talked about this a little bit last week. Ruth, who's not of Israel, what does she get? She gets land and children. She gets this piece of Israel. She gets to live there, be part of them, be part of their society. She's blessed by it. She's fed in it. And we get this beautiful picture of somebody being brought into all these blessings that were promised to Abraham. So they had during the period of the judges, right? They had no king, which has created chaos. And so they say, we want a king, and they get a king, which is first Saul, and then David. David unites all the kingdom really under one king. Saul's was still kind of like loosey-goosey. David really is the most like united kingdom. And he brings the tabernacle from a place called Shiloh, and he brings it to Jerusalem, and he sets up the capital at Jerusalem, and then his son Solomon builds the temple. And when he builds the temple, it's this place in 1 Kings 8 where the people should come and experience God and be answered by God. Okay, pop quiz, because I can see you glazing over, right? Okay. Wait, which way do you read the past? This is the past, right? This is your past, okay. Where was originally God's presence with people in the Bible? Garden of Eden, okay. Then in the wilderness, where was his presence with the people? The tabernacle. Now in Israel, where's his presence with the people? The temple. You guys are doing great, okay. All right. So the kingdom, though, it splits, right? It splits because there's bad kings, there's sin, they split apart. Now the north cannot even access the temple. They actually build their own fakey temple with weird bulls that they worship, and that's like bad. And so, but the temple is down in Judah. And over time, during this time, this is where a lot of the books of Kings takes place and a lot of Chronicles. And so what you see is they start to develop this idolatry. It starts with Solomon in 1 Kings 11. And then over time, it gets worse and worse until it says that Manasseh brings idols into the temple. And so now, right, you can read that in the Bible and be like, that seems bad, but is it that bad? Now we understand that the temple is God's presence among them, and he's brought the idols right into the temple itself. So now we kind of see the weight of what's going on. The land is now used for idol worship. What in Deuteronomy 28 and 29 was going to happen if they didn't obey the Lord in the new land? The land would be cursed, they would be cursed, and what I forgot to tell you is they would be removed from it. Okay, which is where we get to with the exile. So they're removed from it. The land's not given its rest, which is this weird thing where you're like, why would they be exiled? Part of it's idolatry, and you're like, that makes sense. They were bad for worshiping other idols. Like, that makes sense in my brain. But part of it is they were supposed to let the land rest every 7 years, and they weren't doing it, okay? And so God's going to remove them from the land and give it its when I say rest, so they were harvesting it, and then every 7 years they were supposed to let it be fallow. Partly it's out of trust for the Lord, it's like, dang, we're going to have no income for a year. And part of it is that there's agricultural reasons to let the Dust Bowl. You're familiar with the Dust Bowl? Yeah, so you let the land rest, right? Okay. All right, so in Ezekiel, which is really interesting at this point, he has this vision of God's glory leaving the temple. So it like gets up and it leaves, and it's like God has abandoned the temple at this point. That's no longer where my presence lives with you, which is really impactful and scary. But God, right, this is where he's been, and all of a sudden he's not there anymore, and we're removed. So the people, many of them are removed from the land. It's conquered by foreign kingdoms. And they're told in Jeremiah, remember I said this is probably in your refrigerator. I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Do you have that verse on your fridge? Some of us do. That great verse, the context of that, remember, is everybody was telling them, 7:34. Everybody was telling them, God would never send us into exile. God would never take us from this land. God would never do what he said he was going to do. And Jeremiah's like, actually, he is going to do that. And we're going to go establish homes in this new place. We're going to pray for the good of it. And which is really interesting. It says we're going to make gardens there. So the whole point tonight is you should have a garden. Okay. Why is the land so important? So you and I don't necessarily you've probably moved a few times in the last few years. I've moved a few times in the last few years. I've lived in this valley for 79 years, and I've lived in every city in this valley, I think, some of them twice, but I never really leave, okay? But we move around a lot. This is different back then, okay? This is very different back then for a number of reasons. One, heritage. You probably don't think of your house as this is my heritage that my ancestors from time immemorial have owned. It's probably I bought this house 5 years ago. I don't know, like when you bought your house, right? It's just different. It just doesn't feel the same. Even if it was like your parents' house, still not the same. We're talking about generations and generations and generations that had come in, and this was their allotted land by tribe and then by family. So the heritage of the land, and that's also that's their bank account as well. This is their well-being. They don't have a 401k. This is their 401k. The temple is there, right? Now we don't take the temple with us. It used to be we could pack it up. Now we can't pack it up. So if we go into exile, we leave the temple behind. Now, actually what happened was the Babylonians came and broke it apart and raided it and took everything out of it. Ooh, it's been gutted and destroyed. And so it's even worse than just we're leaving it behind. There's no access to it, even for the people who are staying. That was the center of their worship, was there in that place. Power, so actual military, economic power, where they was very strategic. God put them in the right place, this crossroads of the Mediterranean and these different empires from Egypt to Babylon and Assyria. They're in this very specific place. They've lost that. The blessing and curse thing we talked about, they're experiencing now, we're being cursed, the land is cursed, and we're being cursed by being removed from it. And if you're a super Bible scholar, where was their king, their Messiah, supposed to come be born? Bethlehem. Shoot, we just got removed from Bethlehem. What are we going to do now? Where can he be born, right? We have to go back. And so actually God does allow that. They come back in what we call the return, and they actually come back, but only a portion of them, and they rebuild the temple. But it's not like before. It's kind of lame. It's like, this isn't what I remember, right? And so they build it, but it's just not the same. But they still have one. They're back. They're ready. They have this revival. And then we go into this period between the testaments that we call the silent years. I have a whole video online if you want to know the history of what happens during that time and why the New Testament is so weird, and not weird, but just so different from the Old Testament. You can watch my whole video. But there's a series of empires that conquer Israel. And so they're constantly just conquered and conquered and conquered by these different people. It's so weird when the Pharisees are arguing with Jesus. Actually, it's not even doesn't matter who it is. They're arguing with just the people who said they follow Jesus, but they're arguing with him and they're saying, we're Israelites and have never been slave to anybody. It's like, you've been slave to everybody. Like, this just person out. Did you remember my fish thing last week? It's just empire conquering empire, conquering empire, conquering Israel. And so we then have Jesus come on the scene. Yay! So Jesus comes on the scene, and let me give you a few things that Jesus does in relation to this. First, we would say that, as we said last week, Jesus is the new Adam. He begins a new creation and making us not only in God's image, but transformed to be like him. All people are made in God's image. We're all made in God's image. Jesus comes, and he does us one better. It's not just that we're made in his image so that we're something like God. Every human being is in God's image. But Jesus comes and he says, I'm actually going to make you in my image. I'm going to make you like me, not just like me in a category, but you're going to be like me in character now. I'm going to change you. 1 John 3:2 says we will be like God when we see him as he is, but none of us actually know what that means, it says. And so he's going to come. One person has said that he's the first of a new way of being human. He's the first of this new creation. So when we look to what will we be like, it will be Jesus. We will look like him, be like him. Jesus is the truest temple where God dwells with man on earth. The temple is the place where human and divine meet. There is no clearer place where human and divine meet than Jesus. He was both human and divine, where he's here on earth with us, interacting with us. The temple was where sacrificial worship takes place. Jesus sacrificially and obediently gave himself for us. Jesus is Lord of the earth, exercising dominion over creation, healing diseases, feeding the hungry, casting out demons, and conquering death. Jesus' miracles, one guy said it this way, it's like if you took a black like tarp or blanket or whatever thing, and it was just dark, and then we poked little holes in it, and we put a light behind it. And so you see these little pinpricks of light. When Jesus comes along, what his miracles are doing is showing you the world as it was supposed to be, the world as it will be one day again. He comes, and in John 9, he sees there's this man who's born blind, and they say, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus says, no, that's not how this works. It's not a direct result of sin that he's born blind. However, the fact of blindness is a result of our fallen, sinful world. Does that make sense? So here you have the system is broken, and we live in this broken system, and we experience disease, decay, and death. You ever notice like kids are scared, and you maybe even you, like it's scary, like when someone is like, there's like a movie with someone that someone died, or there's like a skeleton or Halloween or whatever. Why are we scared of that? Because it's not natural. We know that somewhere in us, that's not normal. Even before we go, this reflects on my own mortality, and I don't want to die, and so I don't want to be a skeleton one day. No, it's just creepy. Like we just know viscerally that's not normal, right? It's normal. It's not natural. That's not God's original design. This is why I believe in John 11, Jesus is both weeping, it says, and angry when he confronts the death of Lazarus. This was not the original design. And so Jesus is poking these holes, right? And they're different categories of holes that he pokes. Some are about disease. Some are about demons, which is part of, I believe, creation and how it's corrupted. And some of it is just nature itself. Do you remember when he walks on water and they say, he calms the storm rather, and they say, who is this that the wind and the seas obey him, right? He's Lord of the earth. He's exercising dominion over this. John 6, he feeds, actually in two places, 4,000 and 5,000. And so he makes this he feeds them miraculously. This is again him, decay, death, disease, hunger, the fact that you have to work so hard to feed yourself. Maybe not here. We go to the grocery store, but that's not most people's lives around the world. Jesus is going, this is what I designed. Let me give you a little glimpse of it here, right? He's a new Joshua who leads us into God's place, Hebrews says, which is ultimately his eternal restful kingdom. Not a specific place here on earth, but rest with him. I don't have time for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. When Jesus is walking, and if you remember the story, and he walks, it says he went to walk past the boat. It is way too complicated to explain why, but if you get into the details of where they are, he seems to be walking east to west across the delta of the Jordan River, which is a lot like Joshua and another east to west kind of thing. He's like a new David, uniting God's people under his rule. He is like a new Solomon, bringing peace and prosperity to the kingdom, and while he remains faithful, even though Solomon didn't, he establishes his kingdom. And Jesus says that he'll be where? He says, I will be with you always, even to the end of the age. So where's his presence? His presence was among us, and he says, in some form, I will always be among you. What form is that now? I'm sorry that I'm talking faster, but it's 7:42. Now it's us. It's the church. It's the church. When I was a kid, we would learn in Sunday school that you are the temple of the Holy Spirit, and don't smoke. That's what I learned, okay? I'm not kidding. That was always the lesson. So there's two problems with that. Number one, in Greek, the word isn't you, it's y'all. We don't have that in California, but that word it's y'all. Y'all are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Y'all is the temple of the Holy Spirit is kind of how it works. You collectively are where God lives. What does that mean, you collectively? Who is it talking to? The church. The church community is now where the Holy Spirit dwells. We are now where people would come experience. We are now where sacrificial worship takes place. We're now where God meets earth. It's in the church. We're where people should experience that. It's in the church. We are a new creation, it says in Corinthians. A new creation, maybe Colossians, but we're a new creation. God doesn't create, I don't believe, between you have the creation and ultimately he will recreate a new heavens and a new earth. In between that, the only thing he creates is you and me anew. It's really powerful and mysterious. And so we are that current temple. We talked last week about this, that in Genesis 1:28, he says to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. In Matthew, he says, go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, teaching them to all that I have commanded you. So in Genesis, they're supposed to subdue the earth. In Matthew, ultimately, he has subdued the earth. He says, all things have been put under my feet. Therefore, go and baptize. We still have a sense that we subdue the earth, but ultimately, Jesus is saying, I have subdued all things. Go invite all people into my kingdom. And so ultimately, the Bible points forward to God creating a new heaven and a new earth, finally perfect, everything good, no disease, no death, no decay. It even talks about the tree of life, but that the nations eat freely from it now. In Revelation, it makes its first appearance since Genesis 3, this tree of life. And then Jesus dwells there. It says there's this new Jerusalem, and Jesus dwells there among his people forever. And so we see that heaven and earth are not these two separate things. We talk a lot, right? We think that when we die, we actually got this idea from Greek mythology more than anything else. When we die, we will become like a disembodied spirit living somewhere forever and playing a harp. That's not at all. The Bible says that there's a temporary, we're disembodied temporarily, but that's not our natural designed state. It's actually to have a body. I would say this is your rule of thumb. Everything that happened before Genesis 3, everything that happened before the fall will be there again in our eternal heaven. So work and purpose. So if you're like, I don't want to not have something to do, there will be something to do. Work and purpose and creativity, relationship, all of that is all there before the fall. It will all be there in the new heavens and the new earth forever. Everything will be well, everything will be good, and there will be no weeds. And interestingly, no ocean. If you hate the ocean, don't worry, no ocean. I could explain that, but I don't have time. I could try to explain, but I don't have time. So what could you do with this? You're like, okay, that was great, but I have no idea. I'm going to get up tomorrow morning, Andrew, and I have no idea what to do with any of those things. Okay. Let me give you just a couple things. Number one, first, if you're just like, I hate this is stupid, ask the Lord to expand your view of the gospel, right? Ask the Lord, that is not my version of the gospel. That's not even what I would even remotely describe as the gospel. Help me to expand so that I have more and more ways to look at the gospel. 2, enjoy or work toward the good of nature and health. You're like, what does that have to do with the gospel? We had a missionary here one time meeting with us, and he was working with this company that had engineered a way to get rice in a rice paddy where a family in their yard could produce it was 50% more rice, right? That helps people. That's good for people. That's the kind of thing we're talking about when we talk, I think, about practically subduing the earth is how could we use this for good? When we talk about things like medicines and things like feeding people, all of that is wrapped into this idea of subduing the earth. We're subduing now the fallen earth, but we're helping people work towards the good of nature. If you have oh my gosh, no, Jesus hates nature. He hates trees. I hope all the tigers go extinct because that sounds more manly. No, actually, that's not a biblical worldview. So you don't have to be like an eco-terrorist to actually enjoy, right? We should enjoy nature more than anybody else because we know who created it, right? We should enjoy that. My wife loves stars and astronomy and stuff. She's like, God made this, and he's the only one who knows what's out there, and he knows the names of these stars. And I'm like, we should be able to enjoy that more than anybody else. We should actually work towards its good. The Bible even has laws about how animals are treated. We should care about those things, okay? Ask the Lord to be more present in your life. If you're like, man, you just said that the temple of the Holy Spirit is the church. When I come to church, I don't feel that. I don't experience that. You seem far from me, God. Ask the Lord, okay, if you designed this place to be where we experience you, not this place, but these people, then would you let me experience that more? Ask the Lord to grant that to you. And then invite someone into your life or into the church to experience God's presence. Man, does my life reflect that? Does my life reflect that God is near? Does my life reflect that I'm being made more and more like him? That I'm made in his image in a way that even beyond what other people are? Can I invite somebody in to experience that? Would somebody come and see that with me? If you're bored this week and you want to look at more material and be like, what is this guy talking about? I will give it to you in more detail on the website. Other than that, we're going to pray because your children are crying, I'm sure.